2, or maybe one and a half.
Maybe 0 to 1.
0 to 1. Integers only.
I mean, 2 is an integer.
But it's not 0 to 1.
Are you ready, Cody?
If my stream is not bad,
No, it doesn't look good.
It's because you're using a MacBook. It's okay. We forgive you.
What the?
I guess I'm not though.
Wait, it looks bad to you guys too, right?
Are you using like a desktop Mac or something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Are you using the new ARM chip?
No.
He made his own.
So it's bad, you're saying?
Yeah, it looks like it's from your own.
It looks bad to you guys too, right?
It's wigging out, yeah.
Okay.
How do I fix it?
Work off a
Rumble.
Windows machine.
Well, I use Zoom every day and it works fine.
If you go to settings and then under
I can barely hear you. Settings,
You said if you go to settings and under video.
voice and video.
Settings, voice and video. Oh boy, that's some echo.
Yeah, then what?
Then scroll down. There's hardware acceleration. Try toggling that.
Nope.
Meanwhile, we'll play tic-tac-toe.
No, I don't have that button.
okay.
What? What?
There's no. I don't know. Can you see this?
What?
Oh, I see a little bit of Discord.
Hello.
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 It's not desired.
We could get infinite Shanes if we wanted to.
Yeah, you can just talk and look at the PowerPoint and then. Oh, that'd be so bad.
Who would want infinite chains?
Fair.
You guys know. Oh, it plays with me.
Yeah, that's a lot of Shane.
Hey Shane, you have a Help Night notification? Just wanted to let you know.
No, I don't.
You have a folder notification?
You can't prove that.
Fine, I'll take it to the Supreme Court.
Getting roasted in tic-tac-toe. God, that's so bad. Got beat by a level 1 bot.
Refresh the
Medium.
page, hide the evidence.
Cody bot?
Hello.
How it do?
You can hear me, right? Oh, maybe you can't. I don't know.
We can hear you, by the way. We
Oh,
can.
okay, good. That helps.
Shane said nothing. And he's gone. Okay, cool. We can't hear him anymore.
Yeah, Cody died. Oh, Cody's alive.
I'm attempting computer number 2. See if that's any better.
What? Stealing Cody is very faint, unfortunately.
What?
It's pretty quiet. Oh, he's alive?
Any better?
Oh, that's it.
You gotta be punching me.
Yeah, that works. Maybe.
You can see things?
Can see things.
Can you hear things?
I can hear things and see things. That's 2 wins.
That is indeed. VApps always. Well, people have their VApps, right?
I don't have one. Oh, wait. DW202.
I think so.
Did it work? No way.
I guess those that want to play along. So
There's 4 servers.
yeah, well, 4 systems, not all servers. So I better pull up these slides. Very, very important we go through the slides. Now I can't take credit for the slides. All the slides, as you see, owner here says Shane. So all of the slides were created by Shane. So here we go. There's a title. That is the end of the slides. All right. Thank you for participating. So, yeah, we're going to do Active Directory stuff. We're like ready, good to go, right? And things still look okay?
Things still look good, yeah.
All right, sweet.
Everything's good.
So, in this V app, there are 2 different networks. I'm just going to kind of riff and we'll learn from each of these networks. They're largely exactly the same, except Network 1 has a Server 19 and Windows 10. Same with Network 2. Network 1's Server 19 has not had Active Directory configured yet as a domain controller. So we'll have the opportunity for you to do that if you would like. So if you want to log in there, I'll kind of show you the process of how that works. And we'll go from there. And then when it takes forever to install, because that's just how it is, we'll move to the other network and it'll be great. And we wait. All right, so this is largely a bare server. The only thing that I did modify other than an IP address on this server is I installed Active Directory Domain Services. So if you go under Manage Add Roles and Features, Active Directory Domain Services is the role that we need to install to turn a server into a domain controller, essentially. So under this little flag here in Server Manager, there will be this Promote Server to a Domain Controller wizard. So we can click on that and go through that. And I'll kind of explain some of the different steps that you'll go through here. Now, in most environments that you'll come across through any of the competitions that we compete in as DefSec Club, you probably won't be setting up a domain controller or a domain, but you'll be managing one that already exists. So yeah, you won't really go through this step, but we'll do it anyway so you know how to do it. First off, when you are turning a server into a full-on domain controller, you're going to have the opportunity to either create a brand new forest with this bottom option here, create a new domain within a forest, or just create a new domain controller and add that to a domain that's already created. So there'd already be domain controllers there. Now, we don't have anything set up in this environment, so we're going to have to set up a new forest. A forest is kind of the top level of a network or of an environment. If you imagined, for example, if we had a company that was very, very large and spanned multiple geographic locations, I might have a company or a forest of abc.com if my company name was ABC. I might have within that forest multiple domains for maybe different areas of the company. If I had like Asia.abc.com and North America.abc.com might be different domains within a forest. Typically within a forest, the domains within a forest can talk to each other. I've never come across an environment in any of our competitions where there are multiple domains within a forest. So probably not anything you'll have to deal with too much. So I'm going to just give this domain a name. I'll call it defsec.local. I believe that's what I called it on the second environment where it is already installed. Then you'll have the next step of domain controller options, what it shows here. A couple things that we're going to set here or that you should be aware of. The forest functional level here and the domain functional level largely determines some of the feature set that is available within this specific domain. So basically run this at the highest you possibly can. If you are running Windows XP in your domain or Windows 7, you're going to have a much earlier version at this functional level. But if you have new machines, just keep that as latest as it can be. Whenever you have a domain controller, it's also likely going to be a DNS server. DNS is absolutely required for any domain controller to run. So you're going to need that. and it will install that for you when you set up the domain controller. The DSRM password here, basically type in whatever you want here when you're setting that up. Hopefully that's not something you would ever need. Excuse me. And I've just used password on exclamation point. Next thing here is going to be DNS options, and it's basically giving you this warning. So what it's saying is I cannot find the authoritative server for defsec.local. I cannot find it. That is correct because it doesn't exist, and that's fine. So we can just kind of skip through this. If you were creating an actual domain using an actual domain name and you wanted it to be routable and this DNS server to actually work for that domain, you would need to have that set up properly to set up the delegation, but nothing we're going to care about here. NetBIOS name is going to default to the first part of your domain name, which will just be defsec in this case. Kind of an older way of accessing some items in here. We'll just kind of next through that. Next is going to be paths, and these you can leave as default typically. If you have a large environment, you might put these on different physical disks, but these are just some of the folders, the shared folders, and not shared folders that domain controllers need. So it'll let you review those options. Yep, it all looks great. It's going to do a quick prereqs check, and we should be A-OK to set up this brand new domain and configure this system, this server, as a domain controller. So it gives you a couple items in here just to be aware of, but you still should be good to go to let that install. I'm going to go ahead and let that install. It does take a little bit of time, and I am impatient, so I'm going to go over to Net2 Server 2019, which is largely exactly the same system with the domain already installed and configured. So, and just dealing, or we don't have to wait, I guess. So I'll get logged in here. Now, when I log in here, oh, anyone saying something?
Question. It looks
Yes.
like I am on Windows Server 2016.
You're in the wrong spot.
I am on DW202. This is DW202, right?
Yes. Are you on Net2 or Net1 server?
They're both 2016.
They're not. They shouldn't be. So you're just seeing like the OS listed in the iLab section, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, over here it says 2016. It's wrong.
Oh, okay.
I believe the version of ESX that is actually running these systems doesn't necessarily know about 2019 yet, I think.
Amazing.
Is what that is. But these all should be running 2019. All right. So on this system, again, we have the domain set up. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is not with this system at all. I'm going to actually go over to the Windows 10 machine within Net2. So I'll open that up, launch the web console for that. And I'm going to join this system to the domain. Now, this is a decently common inject that you will have, is to join a system or join multiple systems, your laptops, your clients, whatever, to an Active Directory domain. One thing I want you to note here is I just logged in with the user DSU. Now, DSU is a local account on this Windows 10 machine. That's going to become important when we start talking about domain accounts. Now, anytime you're going to join a system to a domain, one of the key components to find the domain controllers, find all those services that this Windows 10 machine is going to need is going to be DNS. So we're absolutely going to need DNS to be configured for a DNS server that can resolve all of those domain things. It should be by default. I set that up for you. But if you're having any issues with that, make sure your DNS server is set to one of the DNS servers for your domain controllers in the environment. Hopefully in any corporate environment, for sure, you're going to have more than one domain controller. So if we're going to join the system to the domain, it can be as easy as search for join. In any modern Windows OS, probably from 7 on up, you can just search for join. It'll look a little bit different on Windows 10 than some other earlier OSs, just because they changed things to be stupid looking in Windows 10 or fancy looking, whatever you want to say. Access Worker School is what we're going to do. And through this wizard, this way of doing it, this is like the new Windows 10 way. So we can connect it here. And it's going to probably push us more towards connecting to an Azure Active Directory instance. That is not at all what we have here. We have a local Active Directory domain. So that's what we're going to do down here. We're going to use this alternate actions to join this device to a local Active Directory domain. So the domain that we created is called defsec.local, or at least the one I created earlier when I pushed this VApp out, or Shane pushed it out for me. When you join the domain, it should hopefully pop up and ask for creds. If you get a domain could not be contacted issue, it's going to be networking, it's going to be DNS, it's something along those lines, right? This Windows 10 machine is using DNS to find that domain. So I'm going to use my creds here for that domain. Administrator and password on exclamation point will work here. That is a domain account on the domain controller. So that was really a local account until I turned it into a domain controller, and at that point it becomes a domain account. This step I really wish Microsoft would not include it in here. They're like, hey, create a new account on this computer or on the domain or something like that. And like, no, just I don't want to create any more accounts. Anytime you do create a domain controller or add a system to a domain, you will have to restart it. So I'll let Windows 10 go ahead and restart. And then I'll jump back over to the server, which I didn't think I closed, but apparently I did. So we'll launch Web Console for the server. I just minimized it. That'd be why. And it's nice and grayed out, which is annoying. So, all right, back in the server. So some things to be aware of. Accounts. So domain accounts are going to be managed through Active Directory users and computers. So largely everything you're going to need in any Windows server tools-wise, from Server Manager, you'll access under the Tools menu. We'll go into Active Directory users and computers. Now, keep in mind there is a difference between a local user account and a domain user account. Everything that we're going to see here is a domain user account. So this is an account that lives on the domain controller and can be used probably to log into other domain joined machines. Back on the Windows 10 system here, I could actually try and log in right now, and it's just going to give me that DSU account, which I can log into. That account still exists. It's a local account to Windows 10, but I also can log in with domain accounts. I can sign into the DefSec domain. So in these competitions, do not forget about those two sets of accounts, right? That DSU account exists, but if you go into users here on the domain, there's nothing in here that says DSU. So that DSU account exists only on that Windows 10 machine. So you'll need to kind of keep track of that. So this is a list of all the users and groups that are here by default. I'm going to go ahead and create a new account just for myself so you can see how to do that. Under action, there'll be a new user. Otherwise, this icon right here is the create a new user in the current container. So I can go action new user to do that. I'll create an account for myself. I'm going to call it cmlu_adm for my username, and I'll give it a password, which is super secret and no one knows it except everyone does because it's password on bang. I'm not going to force myself to change it at the next logon, and there I've created an account. So at this point, I could log into that Windows 10 machine with this account. I do want this account to be a domain administrator, and I'm going to stop using this administrator account, we'll say, and kind of lock that account out and have something that I can use for myself. To become a domain administrator, really it's going to be any user account that is in this domain admins group. So you can open up that domain admins group, audit who is actually in that group. And in these competitions, if there's user accounts that are in this group that should not be, get rid of them, right? I do want cmlu_adm to be in this group, so I can add that in. I'll check the name, it comes out correct. And my new account is now a domain administrator. Some other similar groups that you should be aware of. Everyone's going to be in domain users. Everyone should be there by default. Enterprise admins is another very highly privileged group level. So this is another one you for sure should audit. Really audit most of these, but really the domain admins, enterprise admins are two of the big ones to make sure no one in there or no one is in there that shouldn't be. Schema admins is another one, not something that is used a whole lot unless if you're changing the schema of the domain, which is only something you do if you're adding on certain servers and services to the network. So I have that account. I'm going to use that to log into this Windows 10 system just for fun, just to show that it does work. So CMLU admin, use my account name there, and I'm signing into DefSec. I could always force that sign into DefSec too if that's not showing up there by saying DefSec and then /. So that would be the domain that you're signing into. And then I can log in there. It gives me my name of Cody Wellier right away. So that's talking with the domain controller, and I'm logging in as for the first time. Now, computers is going to list all of the computers that are joined to the domain, or at least have accounts on the domain. So right now I just see Win10 in there. That is the only machine I have in this network that is joined to the domain. Domain controllers will be all the domain controllers, which is just the server at this point. Now, this kind of structure over here under Active Directory users and computers is kind of going to be the main structure that you will use to apply policies, to apply settings and things like that on a domain. And that's going to be a really big component for securing your network and really making sure that nothing insecure has gotten into your settings. First off, the thing you should understand are organizational units. So we can kind of view an organizational unit as a folder that we put stuff in. So I can right-click, create new organizational unit. I'll just create one that's called laptops, for example. And in this container, I might put in all of the laptops. So right now I have Win10 in computers. This is a container, users is a container, and they are kind of special in the sense that we can't actually apply any settings to those containers. So because Win10, this computer is still living in this container, I cannot apply any settings to it. So I'll have to move it out somewhere else, and I'll put it into this laptop's organizational unit. It just says, are you sure? Some of the settings could start changing, and yeah, I totally am. So I do want to move that into an OU. You'll probably end up doing the same with users and any other computer accounts. Move them into an OU and an OU structure that makes sense. You can put OUs inside of OUs. You can nest them. It's an organizational piece for you to manage larger numbers of computers. And it's actually something that comes into play with any configuration items as well. I'm just blaring through. Has anyone got any questions while we're looking?
So presumably a lot of this could be scripted, right? Like if you have a domain of, thousands of users, it would be a pain to individually move things like that. So
Yep. I would think you could like select a couple things and drag them over that way. But yes, everything that we're doing here can be scripted, can be done in PowerShell. I don't know all the commandlets right offhand, but there's like a move AD account, and you can move computer accounts. You can move user accounts that way. Yeah, for sure.
And then does this get us into like group policy and group policy update through commands as well?
There is the transition to group policy. So the settings that I'm mentioning, like, hey, you need to put these things in OUs so you can apply these settings. Those settings are going to be applied through what is group policy, as you mentioned. To manage group policy from a domain controller or from another system that is connected to a domain controller, you will go to group policy management to do that. And this is where you'll be. So let's dig in. We'll dive into the forest, into the domain, and then defsec.local is the domain that we have. You'll see this laptops organizational unit that shows up here as well, because I can apply settings now to that OU. Any computer that is inside of that OU and that org unit will receive any settings that I eventually apply to this OU via group policy. I don't see users. I don't see computers, right? Again, remember, these are containers that you cannot apply settings to, so they do not show up in group policy management. Now, as far as group policy management goes, every setting that we create through group policy is applied through what's called a group policy object. So I've got this group policy objects kind of folder here that lists all of the GPOs that exist in the domain. Again, this is a very default spin. I haven't put anything in here. There are these two default domain policies or default policies. Well, by default, the default domain policy is linked right here at the domain level. So every single user account, every single computer account that is not in a container will receive any of the settings that are in this group policy object. Now, there's a default domain controllers policy. You can click on that as well, and you can see where it is linked. It should tell you here under links, and I can open up domain controllers and see that the default domain controllers policy is linked at that level, at that OU. Yeah, so you can actually link GPOs at multiple locations in multiple OUs if you want to. So if you get thrown into an existing environment, you're definitely going to want to come here, look at group policy management, look at the group policies that exist, see where they're linked, and then look at the settings that are applied to them. So if I look at the default domain policy, which you could select it here, you could select it up here. It's all the same thing. Anytime you select one of these link locations, it'll say, hey, you've selected a link. And anything you change here is going to be changed everywhere where that policy is linked. But under settings is where you will see any of the settings that are created within this policy, within this group policy object. That's fun. By default, the default domain policy should have a couple items. And if we look down here, they're largely related to account and password things. So this is a default. I haven't changed any of this. And even on your other domain where you just configured it as a domain, there is a default password policy, and you see some of those settings here, right? Enforce a password history of 24 passwords. Must have a 7-character or more password. It must meet complexity requirements. Does anyone know why we use password and exclamation point? This is a reason why. It meets all of these, right? So it's a pretty easy one to use. Any password policies should be applied at the domain level. And this is obviously where they're set right now. So this is where you'd come in to check those. Now, this view under settings is just that. It is a view. It's not a place where we can change anything. If you want to change a group policy object, change the settings within a group policy object, it's just right click and edit. And that will take you to a little bit of a different view to edit that group policy object. Now, the password policies, for example, I could drill down to those and show you where those are at. Under computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings when that loads, and account policies. And then there is the password policy side. So these are all of the password policy settings. So you can click into any of these settings, see what it is set to, change what it is set to. Maybe I only want to remember 20 passwords. If you're not sure what a setting is or what a setting does, the explain tab should exist on most, if not all, of the settings. So you can kind of read through that and understand what each of these settings are actually doing within your group policy objects. Now, there are a lot of settings within group policy, right? You see how far we drilled in here, and that's not even as deep, I don't think, as some other locations could go within group policy. I think I Googled the other day and it said there's over 5,000 settings within group policy, right? Now, anything that I set on this default domain policy within here, this is of course going to be set to every system in the domain. One common example of a policy that is or could be set as a part of an inject is a Logon Banner. So if you're not sure where a policy is, just Google it, right? So Logon Banner GPO being a group policy object, right? So how do I add that? Where is it located? I can't remember, so we'll Google it. This will be the banner for like legal notices. Hey, you should like follow the law when you log on, yada, yada, yada. But these random places will tell you where: computer, Windows settings, security options, and then it's under interactive logon. Great, right? I can't remember that. You probably can't. So we can Google it. And all of this is documented really well. Most of it should be documented really well. Where did I say it was? Local policies. Yeah, local policies. And security options. I for interactive logon, and down here, I believe. Message text for users attempting to log on, right? Message title for users attempting to log on. So it's not defined right now. So I can go ahead and define it and say alert as the title. And again, you can go to explain and see exactly what that's going to do. And then I'll set up the message text, the system. Yada, 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 right? If you get an inject that is set up something like this as a legal banner, do a little bit of research on what would go into one of these so it's actually a legitimate message, not just something to get the points, because you probably will not get all of the points. So I've made that setting change, and the moment you click OK on that, that setting is changed and it should be able to take effect, kind of, right? I could refresh in this view, refresh. So I went out back into the settings here for this default domain policy. I should be able to scroll down and see that that has changed, right? So here's that setting that I just set up. Alert, the system is owned by DevSec. Now, if I go over to the Windows 10 machine, this is a system that's on the domain. So theoretically, when I log on, I should see that message, right? So I can log out here, sign out, that's the word. And we'll see if it works. Spoiler alert, I hope it doesn't. And already I don't really see anything that is telling me of that message. I actually might need to enable one other setting. Not 100% sure. But we'll work through it live.
Is this where you have to run GP update in the command?
Exactly. So group policies, they're not always instant. I believe it's like a 30-minute randomization period so that not all of the systems in your network are hitting your domain controller at the same time. Like, give me updates, give me updates. Sometime within a span of 30 minutes, if we waited, that policy should take effect on this computer. If we are impatient, as I am, we can run GP update on this computer with a little /force on here. And that should force this machine to go to the domain controller, find the new policies, pull them down, and apply them. Some policies will absolutely not be applied even if you do it this way. Some of those would be like user logon scripts. I think drive maps will not be applied. Those will only be applied after you log out and log back in. But this one should be fine. So I'll try it again after a GP update. Sign out, see if it changes. If not, I might need to enable Control Delete, and I don't. There it is. Right. So I just clicked in. There's that alert. You must click through it, and then you can go ahead and actually log in. So that is an example of a setting within a group policy object. So this is that default domain policy. Again, if you get thrown into a network, you get thrown into an environment with a domain controller, look at this. Audit all of these group policy objects. Look at every group policy object that exists. Figure out where they are linked, and make sure they're secured as best as they can be. If you want to create new group policy objects or add settings to any of the machines, you can do that as well, right? So I've got that Windows 10 machine here under laptops. I could right click and create a brand new group policy object and link it here. Give it some name that makes more sense than what I'm going to name it here. Let's call it laptop policy. But any settings now that you would apply to this laptop policy GPO are applied to any system that is in this laptop's OU, right? Which right now is absolutely nothing. Since it's brand new, it didn't add anything. It's just been created, right? Computer configuration, user configuration, they're different sides. There are different settings on each. Some settings will actually exist on both. So you'll see a little bit of overlap there. But I'd implore you to just look around at some of those 5,000 plus different group policy settings that exist. A couple other items to mention here on group policy is going to be some of the filtering and linking and things like that. So when I click in here, you can see some of that here, security filtering and the like. Under scope, it will give us that as well. This is the default, and this, in my opinion, is how it should stay. If you have security filtering in here that includes anything other than authenticated users, it's going to get more complex. That basically would limit who this group policy object can apply to, even within the entire domain at this point. Not something I recommend using. And I believe under details or delegation. So yeah, delegation, there's some of that as well, some permissions. Everyone needs to be able to read it so they can apply it. I would recommend just leaving it that way. You don't want everyone to be able to edit it though, right? I don't know if that's something that they can actually do, but that's not something you would want. Also under details, this one is something that could possibly get messed with in a default spin of a competition environment. If the GPO status is not fully enabled, it's not something that is really easy to see. If I do disable that, it gets a little bit more grayed out there, but yeah, it's not super easy to see. So if something doesn't seem to be working right, those are some items that you can check. One other item on group policies and their being applied. I'll get out the famous Tom notepad and talk about LSDOU. That is the order that group policy settings are applied, and this makes a difference in what actually is going to take effect. So local site, domain, and organizational unit is what each of these are. In my Windows admin class, I have folks remember that because it is important to know that order. So local group policy, that actually is a thing. So if I go over on the Windows 10 system, this is not the domain controller. You could search for group policy. If you spell it right, it might work. Edit group policy there. Otherwise, gpedit.msc will also get you there. If you remember that, it's probably a quicker way. But this is the local group policy on this system, right? So I can see here local computer policy. When I was over on the server editing any policies, if I pulled up the default domain policy again, so this is the default domain policy on server.defsec.local. Right. So most of these settings, not all of these settings, but most of these settings at the domain level also can be set on a system by system basis directly on that computer. So if something is being applied, some setting exists that you don't see in group policy on the domain controller, it is possible that it is being set here in the local policy. So like account policies, password policy, here's the password policy for this Windows 10 computer. Is questions being monitored? No, it's not. I'm totally not monitoring anything. I don't know if I should. RIP. You can type them there or speak them. That's fine. I'll totally answer. Yeah, so this is the local policy. Now where LSDOU comes into play, where that's important, again, this is the order that things are applied, and the last thing that applies wins. So the local policy is applied first. So any settings you have in that local policy will be applied. There can be group policy level or group policies that are applied at the site level, which is even up above or down here in sites, which there'll be a default sites. There should be anyway. Not something you'll see much of. And then policies at the domain level, and then policies that are local to the org unit of that system. So what that means is if this laptop policy had a setting that conflicted with default domain policy, the laptop policy should win for anything within laptops, right? Yeah, ask questions. If anyone has questions, I'm flying. Or anything else y'all want covered, I'm good with that too. Because I'm almost running out. Oh, hey, look at that. I like that. Answering what you asked. Sweet. Let's see, what else is important? I think those are really the big things within a domain. So if you are the person running the domain controller, check. Well, that's where you're going to be living in mostly. A little bit of Active Directory users and computers, and a lot in group policy management, right? You're doing the settings for the entire network, or at least you have the opportunity to. You can even set things like the firewall. So I could go under policies, Windows settings. I guess that's probably a frequent one. Security settings, and that is under Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. And Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. And these are your firewall settings, right? So this will look exactly the same. I think you've had firewalls in DefSec already, but this will look exactly the same as the Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security on any system in general. It's just you can apply it here at the domain level. So, for example, I could go in and force the firewall to be turned on for every single system in the domain, no matter what. Apply that, and that setting is now set, right? I haven't set a default behavior. You might want to do that. You could set rules here that apply to every system in the domain. Or put it at a different OU, and that would be applied. If I run back over and I see a question over there, I'll read that in a moment. Let's do a GP update on here. GP update force. And I'll search for firewall with advanced security. And we'll probably see here in the firewall that for your security, some settings are controlled by group policy. I think I used to say just controlled by your administrator. I think group policy is a new thing, but you can't change it here. So in another case, if you ever get into a competition where you can't change this and it says the firewall is off, you need to go to whoever's managing your domain controller, find the group policy that is actually applying that, and fix it. I guess I'll go off on another little riff here. As long as you are looking for group policies that are actually being applied, one tool that you should be able to use for that, and there are a couple, is GP results. There's also a result instead of policy, or RSOP. If you run GP results /H, which is going to be just the type of output, some HTML output, results.html. What this should do on this computer is tell me what group policy settings are actually taking effect for this computer and for this user account that I'm logged in as. So if you're having trouble finding what group policy is setting the firewall settings, for example, this should help. I hope it works. So we'll pray to the demo gods here and see if it actually gives me something. I don't see a whole lot in here. Yeah, apply GPOs. There should be something in there, but there's not. So demo fail. We'll just chalk it up to that. But RSOP and GPU result really should help you with some of those things. Question here earlier mentioned that default domain policy applies to all computer. So it applies to all computer and user objects that are in an OU. They're not an option. So if I don't answer the question, yell at me, or like chat at me, whatever. Say not Windows 10. Let's go over here. So Active Directory users and computers. And I'll jump back over here as well. That's not exactly what I wanted. Any group policy object, especially those applied at the domain level, well, the domain level group policy objects will apply to any OU under that, anything in that entire domain. So let's see. What am I looking for? Group policy management. So this default domain policy, if I like collapse everything else under it, defsec.local. So this default domain policy applies to everything that's in domain controllers and everything that's in laptops. That's it. So kind of the biggest gotcha that folks have is this computer's container. It is called a container. It's not actually an OU. And this user's container, they cannot have group policies assigned to them, right? So this user account is not going to get any group policies pushed to it. If I pulled, and we'll see if this actually works, I don't know if it will. If I pull this Windows 10 system back into computers, so it's no longer in that OU, because it's in this container, it will get 0 group policy objects applied to it. Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing will apply to that. And that is a key consideration, right? Make sure if you expect group policy objects to apply to anything, even the default domain policy, you cannot have systems in the default containers, right? It will not apply. So theoretically, if I go back to here and try and do a GP update, it should theoretically disappear any of those policies. So I'm waiting on that. Next question is, does a reboot not check in with the domain controller upon a reboot? Yeah, I believe it should. I believe a reboot probably should check in with the DC when it starts, when the computer starts up. I'm not going to absolutely guarantee that, but kind of as you mentioned, of course, GP update forces a quick way to do it so you don't have to reboot. Especially if your system has services on that it is running for the network, you might not want to reboot that. If I refresh here, it does still say settings are controlled by group policy. I don't know if those settings will completely disappear right away, even if I do a GP update. But moving this system into a container, well, yeah, I kind of did there, I think. Windows 10, how do I exit this? I don't know if I can. Like I saw that alert thing pop up and then it disappeared. I don't know if that was just I clicked fast or not. But yeah, again, those default containers, you cannot apply GPOs to them. You cannot apply settings to them. So final question, would creating an OU inside of those containers allow you to apply a group policy object to those containers? And that's actually a no, because you cannot create a new OU inside of those. At least you shouldn't be able to. Like I don't see anything in here that says OU. You can move OUs around. So just for fun and to kind of demonstrate that and make myself feel good that that's accurate. Another one. Like this is an OU within laptops. So, and actually the nesting here is another good point that I should bring up. If you weren't aware, any group policy applied at the laptops level will trickle down and apply to any computer or user account that's within this another one. So I could drag that around. I could put it at the domain level. So now that GPO, oh yeah, access denied. That's right. Because I think I set that to force that I can't move it, but I definitely cannot move it into computers. You should not be able to create OUs inside of those. Any other questions?
So is this the basis for like single sign-on stuff as well, and LDAP and all that?
It's the start of it. Yeah, there'll be other services that will run some of that. Like ADFS is a whole nother service, but it will use Active Directory on the back end to service that. LDAP is more so the protocol that machines might use to authenticate against a domain controller. So a DC is going to serve LDAP. You'll use LDAP to talk to the DC to authenticate with user accounts that are in the domain, things like that. Yep, it all kind of comes back here. Domain controllers and domains are a big central point for tons of Windows services. A lot of Windows services need it or work better with a domain controller setup. Anyone else? All right. I think Shane's next.
What? Okay. Thank you, Cody, for presenting. Appreciate your Windows knowledge.
Yay, Windows.
Yay, Windows. It was.
Yay, knowledge.
I don't think it made me like Windows, but.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone really, really liked that and you're not a NetSec major,